Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Hello dear student, have a nice day. Myself Kiran Patel, Assistant Professor in School of Computer Science of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Dear students, we are going to start with the course RDBMS, Relational Database Management System. In today's session, we will learn about the Block 4 Unit 2 is a cursor in a PLSQL. Now we will start with the Block 4 Unit 2 is a cursor in PLSQL. First of all, we see the agenda of the Unit 2 is a learning objectives, introduction of cursor, cursor execution cycle, types of cursor, cursor for loop, parameterized cursor in PLSQL, etc. In last session, we have been already completed the Unit 1 in a Block 4 is a introduction to PLSQL. After completed this unit, the students will be able to understand the cursor in PLSQL, how to define, declare, initialize and access the data from the table using cursor in a PLSQL. Now start with the cursor in PLSQL. When SQL statement is processed, the Oracle creates a memory known as a context area. A cursor is a pointer to this memory area or a context area. This memory area contains all the information needed for the processing the SQL statement. In PLSQL, the context area is controlled by the cursor. A cursor contains the information on the select statement and rows of the data accessed by it. If you execute the select statement or a select command or insert, update, delete command, then those statements fetch the record from the table and those records are stored in a cursor or a memory area. Now, Oracle uses a work area to execute the SQL commands and store processing the information to access this area using the cursor name. For the execution of every SQL statement, certain area in a memory is allocated. This private SQL area is called the context area or a cursor. It can be used by the user to process the output of select statement that returns the more than one row. The cursor is used to retrieve the data one row at a time from the result set. The cursor updates the table records in a singleton or a row by row manner. The data that is stored in a cursor is called the active data set. When we declare the cursor, we get the pointer variable, which initially does not point anywhere. When the cursor is open, the memory is allocated and cursor structure is created. The cursor variable will now point to the cursor. When the cursor is closed, the memory allocated for the cursor is released. So when we use the cursor, then we open the cursor as well as close the cursor. Now cursor execution cycle. The life cycle of the cursor is declared into the following stages. These 5 stages are used when we use the cursor. First of all, we declare the cursor. The declared cursor in a declaration section. You already know how to write the PLSQL block. First of all, first section is the declaration section. After then begin section, then exception section and then end. So in a first section, declared section, we can declare the cursor with the SQL statement. So the declared cursor in a declaration section, the cursor is declared by defining the SQL statement that returns the result set. In result set, some row is stored in the memory. Now open the cursor. Open cursor using open keyword like open and then cursor name, which is defined in a begin section or a executable part. The cursor is open and populated or executed the SQL statement defined by the cursor. Now third one is a fetch. The fetch statement is used fetch one row at a time using fetch statement. When the cursor is open, the row can be fetched from the cursor one by one or in a block to perform the data manipulation. The close is used for close the cursor. Close, then cursor name. The close cursor after all the records in the cursor are fetched and processed by using the cursor statement. After the data manipulation, the close the cursor is executed. Now deallocate the cursor. Finally, delete the cursor definition and release all the system resources associated with this cursor. See in the example or in the figure, the important steps in the cursor execution cycle are open, fetch and close. The cursor execution cycle refers to the stages which a cursor follows to process and execute the query. The phases of the cursor execution cycle are listed below diagram. See in the diagram. The activity carried out by the server in a key phases. See, open the phases is used. In these phases, the memory is allocated for the cursor processing. The select statement is parse or binding the variable and execute the select query. And finally, pointer moves to the first record. So, open cursor used for this. The fetch phases. In this phases, the record to which the record pointer points is retrieved from the record set. The record pointer will move only in a forward direction. The fetch phase is live until the last record is reached. Next is a close phases. After the last record of the result set is reached, the cursor is closed. If the open cursor is not closed, Oracle automatically close it after the execution of the parents block is completed. So, first is the open stage, open the cursor, and then in this cursor is binded with the SQL statement. So, the parse SQL means it find out the syntax. It will all the error free or not. Then bind the SQL statement with the data and then execute the query. And after execution, fetch the data from the table and stored in a memory. And then execution is performed. After that, processing is completed, the cursor is closed. Now the types of the cursor. There are two types of the cursor, implicit cursor and explicit cursor. Now what do you mean by implicit cursor? The implicit cursor are automatically generated by the Oracle while SQL statement is executed. If you do not use the explicit cursor for the statement, we can directly use this cursor without any declaration. The PLSQL use the implicit cursor when the SQL query returns a single row. There are created by default to the process the statement when the DML statement like insert, update, delete, etc. are executed. So, implicit cursor is automatically created. We cannot create explicitly. Now the explicit cursor. Explicit cursor is used when select more than one row using explicit. The PLSQL's implicit cursor can handle only single row queries. But if you need to select the more than one rows using the select, then you have to use the explicit cursor. The set of rows fetched by the query is called the active set. The select command in PLSQL block will retrieve only one row at a time. If the select command retrieve no rows, then no data found exception will be raised. If the select statement is fire and it retrieves more than one row, then too many rows exception is occurs. So the select command will succeed of only when it retrieves the single row and the select command copies the value of the commands or the columns that it retrieves into the variable. If the multiple rows are retrieved from the queries or tables, then each column will be copied to the single variable. That will creates the problems. So, if the select command fetch single row, then it will easily handle. But it returns the more than one row, then cursor will be used. The cursor can also be open for processing the data through the PLSQL block on the demand. Such user-defined cursor is known as an explicit cursor. So, students, when you use the cursor, the single row command is automatically used by the implicit cursor, and when we more than one row, the SQL statement fetch more than one row, then explicit cursor is used. Now at the end, thank you all. Today we have been discussed about the PLSQL cursor, how to declare, initialize, define the cursor and types of the cursor. In next session, we will start with the remaining parts of this unit, that is cursor for loop and parameterized cursor. If you understand this session and getting the knowledge from this session, then please subscribe the BAOUGujarat. And once again, thank you all.